So the purpose of this conversation and future conversations on this channel is education, understanding, and growth. I have no intention of hostility and wish for all parties involved or discussed to live happy, fruitful. To outline my background, I'm a humanitarian, free market platformist. I support the teachings of David D. Friedman, Lysander Spooner, and Blair. My guest today is known as Hades on YouTube. Would you like to say a brief outline of what you believe in your current political?
I would call myself primarily a mutualist, and I'm mainly interested in a type of free market anti-capitalism outlined by Benjamin Tucker and a lot of the individualists in North America, although I try not to limit myself to one perspective, as I'm also interested in individualist movements in Europe, egoists, along those lines. Very happy to look at movements abroad and incorporate what I like. Yeah, I guess that's just an outline of my politics.
No, absolutely. And I'm always, trying to educate myself and on the search for other views and looking into stuff, seeing what other people believe in. Mutualism is one that I've recently been learning about and I find very interesting. But so to go ahead and start our questions here, Hades, do you believe all humans are intelligent?
I believe most people have the capacity to be intelligent. I don't really think of intelligence as some inherent quality that people have. More, it's something you gain through engagement with the world. I think most people have the capacity to get intelligence.
Yeah, for sure. So it's like you view it more as something that can be earned and not really an inherent thing.
Yeah.
Do you believe that individual freedom is more important than the good of the people as a whole?
I mainly think of freedom as a way to get the good. Most people know what they want and are capable of getting it if we allow them to. That's why I think anarchism is a good idea, is because more freedom allows more good in our society. And if we really did need a state to have any semblance of order, then I guess I'd be a statist, but I just don't think we can get good things through the logic of authority. How about you?
I've struggled with this one a lot. My initial delving into the whole anarchy thing was A Machinery of Freedom by David D. Friedman. Where great book, just outlines the whole anarcho-capitalism perspective and how the logistics of it and how it would actually work in a society. Maybe really realize that we don't really need the state for most anything. But as far as individual freedom versus the people as a whole, it's a really tough line because there's and actually I believe they talk about this in The Machinery of Freedom. There's the argument of if there's if there's a scenario where horrible scenario, but if there's a scenario where there's a gunman taking down a massive group of people, sure, and the only way to take this person down is to steal somebody's gun without their permission, so somebody's private property without their permission, to take down this person to save the good of the people. It's in that case, obviously I would say, yeah, steal that person's gun to save these people.
Same here.
But it's there's certain ways like that where I agree that the good of the people as a whole is more important. And then there's other smaller things where I'm well, that's kind of up to the individual.
Yeah. Honestly, this kind of inflexibility is why I'm pretty disgusted with natural law theorists, because a natural law theorist would say oh, you can't steal that gun. It's they have a natural right to it or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, you're a total Friedmanite, or do you call yourself that?
No, I wouldn't. I really like David D. Friedman, but I'm really trying to learn from everybody that I can. I recently read through, listened to on Audible because I can't manage to sit down for that long with a regular book. But the Anarchist Handbook by Michael Malice it's a collection of essays and stuff from many anarchists with many different views throughout history. It's where I really learned of like Lysander Spooner and Voltaire de Cleyre, and it talks about Bakunin and like all these different like famous anarchists and their different views throughout time. So really the only consistent view that I can find myself having is that I'm a humanitarian primarily, and so like scientific economic flourishing and is like, and like health and safety are like my primary concerns, and however we get there is somewhat irrelevant to me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I gotcha.
Should a 51% Democratic vote count as a majority and apply to all people?
Do you mean in a society or like in an agreed group setting? Or do you just mean in general?
I kind of just mean in general. I mean, I kind of mean it like in reference to like American politics where, if Democrats have like a 51% in the House, they end up running the whole country, which just doesn't make any sense to me.
I would say right now I would not prescribe that for our legislature by any means, but I would say there's a lot of weird stuff going on that like allows certain groups more power than they ordinarily would in like a democratic setting. That should be dealt with. Primarily like the filibuster, I think, is totally it's detrimental at this point. I don't even see why we should have it. Otherwise, other things like the electoral college that advantages people in states that have less people, I think is ridiculous as well. I guess that's off topic. I think primarily as anarchists, the main thing is voluntary association that kind of regulates this, because there's different circumstances where different kind of organization is necessary. Like I saw a video on pirates by CGP Grey. Okay. They need pirates. They were pretty democratic, but in times of stress, they had to follow the authority of the captain. Like there's no room for democracy there. And like that, I think a lot of different situations kind of need different kinds of inputs from the people within. Like I think large industries where there's a lot of division of labor that produce a lot of collective force, as Proudhon calls it, I think those should be more democratic than like small things where there's like just a bunch of people doing the same thing. Like I don't know, like clipping hair at a hair salon or something. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think it's kind of that's the role of voluntary association. So in these industries, those systems will naturally come about. So yeah.
Yeah. So what primarily makes me ask that question is just because like 51% applying to all people is that's just a very crazy thing to me. Because like in school, you have to get like at least a 70% grade to pass. And so I don't know why something that would be like less than an F on a mathematics test should be considered okay for us to use as law. That's quite bizarre to me. I think in a better system in my head would be something where the only laws that ever applied to everybody would be something that we could have like a 95% agreement on. And then because when you put like a 95% Democratic vote, and then that's like your baseline, all the little things that people disagree on, especially between like Democrats and Republicans, those things kind of go away because they would never be resolved in a 95% thing, and that would just be left up to the individual.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you'd have some caveats there. Like we shouldn't have that system, obviously, because there's a lot of people in this country that have some pretty repugnant views that really that would block like I'm trying to phrase this correctly, but people have views that people should not have the right to something that they otherwise would, and there would be no kind of way to like allow them to do that once that gets passed. If there's like a small minority of people, like 10%, that didn't want them to have that right. This is a little bit off topic, but have you engaged with much minarchist theory?
I've not heavily, no.
I'm not a minarchist, or I never was, but it's just kind of, people like to think about what if the state was just like smaller, but that's not really the purpose of a state to the state, is to grow their own power. So it seems, I've never heard a minarchist explain to me why the state would just remain small. Just doesn't,
right. And I guess at the moment, because it's bound to change, but in a way I could consider myself a minarchist because I do believe if we implemented that kind of a system with like where you had to have a 95% agreement to pass something, I think that would be, well, possibly the most effective way to prevent government from abusing their power, because I 100% agree that if somebody gains power, they just want more. But I feel like if you have that much of a necessary ratio to grow your power, then maybe it wouldn't happen.
Maybe, or just those 95% people are just insane.
Yeah, that's also possible.
Yeah, but I don't know. Maybe it would improve. I honestly don't know how that play out.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. It'd be very interesting. I think even in America, if we changed it to they needed a 60% vote, I think that would change a lot of things, especially for like Democrats and Republicans. They would have to agree on some things. Yeah, create an interesting dynamic. So, what would happen in a society if taxes were voluntary and not taken by threat of force?
Right now, I honestly think there would be a re-implementation of another state, either by, or there would be a breakup of states between the Republican South and the Democrat North.
Okay.
Or America is actually made up of like 11 different nation groups, and there would be a fragmentation of power there. Do you mean like just in America or like in general?
I mean, living in America, I'm primarily thinking about America. So,
well, that's either that or we might get invaded, because part of the revolution is like educating people and like actually getting anarchists. So we don't really have that many anarchists to like sustain or build anarchy. And that was the kind of the main push by like people, the individualists, is to like get people educated to like want anarchism. But if we don't want that, we're probably just going to result in another state. But I can talk about, if we had anarchists to organize, I could talk about what would come after. But right now, we're probably going to relapse into statism.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I do think in all these different views of anarchism that I've seen, it seems like the primary thing to make them all function has to be an initial like change of philosophy within society, because we would have to all drastically change how we think about everything. I am curious. Are you versed in Ayn Rand? What do you think of her?
I've seen the movie adaptations of Atlas Shrugged. If that makes me well read, or not well read, but like versed. I don't think so. But
gotcha. The whole objectivist movement is very individualistic. This is a question that I'd really like to hear your answer on, and I'm pretty sure you have a good answer for.
Sure.
So is there a difference between capitalism and a free market economy?
Yes, I would say so. Of course, this is kind of semantic, because we all know capitalists' definition of capitalism is just a free market, which I don't think that is, because honestly, when I talk to an anarcho-capitalist, they're just not talking about a free market. They're obviously implying a lot more baggage, like what that free market is going to be. Like, if the free market results in like a decentralized gift economy, I don't think they would call that capitalist, right? Or maybe they would, but I think you get the point.
Mm-hmm.
The capitalism implies to be like a rule of capital, as Gary Chartier put it. There's one class of people that called the idling class or the capitalistic class or whatever, that is allowed to receive an unearned income as a tribute to capital for its use. So essentially it's kind of a monopoly on capital, which we can get into how that monopoly comes about, but that's primarily what it is, in my view.
Do your views on that primarily come from Proudhon, or do they come from like Marx?
I guess they primarily come from individualists.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Proudhon ever uses the term capitalism. Maybe he does. He says like, yeah, I don't think he does, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
But it comes from just engagement with the left, I suppose. I think you get a lot of interesting things when you engage with the leftists past, like the utopian socialists and like the anarchists, because you see a lot of things about the views of socialism that are different from the like what we think of like Marxism. Like a lot of Marxists will say capitalism is like when we have a boss and a worker in the workplace, but
Right.
they see that as a fundamental evil, but this was not the fundamental evil for a lot of socialists in the past. Like Proudhon, the error was in the way we structured our exchange, like the monopoly on currency, which Benjamin Tucker talks about and William B. Greene. Like there's a fundamental limit to access to the capital that is produced that allows people to earn rent, like unearned rent on capital as profit. So for them, socialism may result in some wage labor, but they're still consistently socialist in their eyes, even if they're not recognized as such by some modern leftists.
It's definitely something that I don't think that like people on the general right, just like Republicans, would ever know that people even think there's a difference between capitalism and free market economy.
Yeah, I'd agree.
Yeah, and it's funny how much as I try to educate myself as much as I can on different forms of anarchy, how much that's made me understand the big government status more, because I'm like, I understand exactly where that idea comes from, because anarchy can kind of like deconstruct all levels of it, because there's anarcho-communist and there's like all this like different forms of anarchy, but like it helps me understand the fundamentals of everything.
Mm-hmm.
Do you support private property or collective ownership?
When you say private property, do you mean like individual appropriation, or can you give me like a little bit of what you mean by that?
I guess in the sense of like, this is my car and it's not your
like car. You have the right to exclude people from it.
Right.
Yeah, I would say I support private property in that sense. I think a lot of anarchists, especially in something like the Anarchist FAQ, if you ever have read some of that, they describe private property as like a privilege, a state-granted monopoly or privilege on some thing or something like that. It's something stupid that I don't think even ANCAPs endorse at all. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot of baggage with the term private property. So I may be pro-private property in one sense, or pro-collectivization in another, I guess. Mm-hmm. But I would say I think there's certain things that really do need to be collectivized, and there's some things that are more individual and thus should be individualized, if that makes sense. But all of that should stem from individual autonomy and reciprocity as individuals.
Yeah, that's one thing I found very interesting looking into mutualism is it's like I almost saw it as like a form of like voluntary communism in a way, because it talks about collective ownership, but it also like very much pushes the individual within it. Mm-hmm. So what are some of the things that you would push for collective ownership?
Before I talk about that, there actually is a book called Voluntary Socialism, which is one of the like the short guidebooks on like kind of individualist anarchist philosophy. So
Yeah.
for what should be collectivized, I think I talked about it earlier with the collective force, where when the product is not due to like the sum of individual forces, like each person is doing the same task and like it's basically the sum, but when a collective of people, there's a diversity of functions, they all create a product that's greater than the sum of their parts. And in that respect, there seems to be no reason to me why that should be an individually appropriated by like a capitalist. Like, by what standard of right do they have claim to that product? And in that sense, I think self-management is necessary for those types of workplaces.
Do you have any like specific examples?
I think like people building a big ship. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's like there's so many functions that go into like making the parts and like moving it, constructing it, designing it. Like there's so many functions in that area that it's impossible to say like the person that has funded everything should get like the surplus of the product. Like it just doesn't make sense. Or like should direct all of them, as like it just seems like a remnant of kind of like feudalist past almost to say that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so in a scenario like that, or like an assembly line for a car,
sure.
Should the profits that come from selling that car, should that be divided among the laborers? Can
you tell me what you mean by profits, just for reference?
Sure. So in like an assembly line where all these people are creating this this item to be sold to somebody, there's the gross profit would be like anything earned that is above the cost of materials.
Sure. Are you in that sense?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it should be equal unless all their contributions were equal. There's a almost semantic difference between, I think capitalists use profit as like anything above the cost of materials and production, like you said. But I think a lot of socialists, or most socialists, I would say, use profit as like a synonym for extracted surplus value from the worker. So I don't think profit in that second sense should exist, but profit in the first sense should be divided based on effort, and that's kind of the natural function of the free market.
Okay, and I'm just trying to follow along and understand.
Yeah.
So how do you determine how would the market determine the value of something? If you wanted to buy a pack of gum, how is the value of that pack of gum determined?
Sure. So this comes into the labor theory of value, which I've actually started back in February, I think, researching this, and it's such a big subject that I've barely made any headway. Yeah. But how it's determined in the mutualist sense, which stems from the writings of Adam Smith, is the toil and trouble of producing it, or the necessary disutility, like the pain you feel that it takes to exert to make a pack of gum. So it has to cover that cost primarily, or else it's not going to get made.
So if that became like primary, I could see that raising the cost of a lot of things, potentially. I could also see it lowering the cost of several other things, because I imagine something as simple as like a pack of gum probably does require some labor. It might all be in a machine, I don't know, but a food item could require like a significant amount of labor depending on what it is. Whereas, I don't know, so just going back to it, something like a car where you're just, using a power drill to screw things in and stuff might cause the cost of that to go down.
Well, you also have to factor in the costs of the drill, which also has pain associated with it. Well, although it is based on pain, the chief factor of which is time, which I think Smith lays out. It may cost the price of things to raise because Actually, right now, I've been writing something on Bernd Bavork. His points against the labor theory is that there's deviation based on labor on certain industries where the cost of the wages is extraordinarily cheap. So it may raise the cost of certain items because people aren't the wages of these people aren't artificially depressed, but I don't particularly see that as a bad thing.
Okay, yeah, I follow that. In a mutualist society, a mutual like collective society, how do you treat subversion? Because, like we were talking about earlier, I think in order to create like a functioning anarcho society, no matter how that looks, it kind of has to fundamentally be like a philosophical change for it to function.
Mm-hmm.
But even if that major philosophical change happened, how would you treat subversion in that? How do you hold those people accountable? Do we need to hold them accountable?
I assume you mean by this by like antisocial activity. So like I'm stealing your car or something.
Right.
I think private arbitration should do a fine job. I don't think we're going to need it for a long time because I think most crime is going to be lingering effects of governmentalist past. Like the poverty, as we know, is kind of the chief source of crime. Mm-hmm. So when we deal with that issue, where there's no systemic poverty, I think crime is going to dampen very, very significantly. And a lot of other problems are associated with our economic system right now that I think are going to go away. So as Proudhon called it, we're going to replace the police with an identity of interests. So there's not going to be antithetical interests between an idling class and a working class, and I think that's going to deal with a lot of crime in our society. But there probably is going to be a lot of other crime that's going to remain. I mean, I think people get antisocial personality disorder from like just pure biological influences. So we may need private defense in that area. Where I think I really need to do more research in this aspect in prison abolition. Mm-hmm. I think I'm going to make that a future video, but we may need like to restrain some people, but a lot of these people are kind of like the supervillain fallacy that Spooky has been talking about on C4SS. Like, there's not a lot of people that are just like supervillains and that they just want to cause as much harm as possible. Mm-hmm. Even psychopaths just kind of like are self-centered and like maybe it gives them pleasure, but if the costs were too great, maybe they would be a supervillain, but those people are very few and far between to need any institutional violence like a state to stop them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That changing the economy would change a lot of crime, and there'd also, of course, in the current American context of crime, there's a plethora of victimless crimes that would just.
Oh yeah. Well, I don't count that as antisocial activities.
No,
so
not at
it's
all.
Not really a crime.
Yeah. So how do you avoid becoming a utopian in your beliefs, and losing the footing of reality in pursuit of a better life? So does that make sense?
I think I get what you mean.
How do you provide a realistic pathway to getting to where you want to be?
Well, I think anarchists I guess we are kind of utopian in that we're kind of demanding the impossible for a state to just like dissolve. I think primarily grounding, I think, it is a little bit tough question because we're kind of talking about, this is very unorthodox, the anarchists are going towards. But to remain grounded, you really have to be cognizant and like observant of circumstances right now, mm-hmm. supporting campaigns to like educate people, forwarding our movement or whatever. Mm-hmm. And praxis is a big part of it too. Like actually bring about changes we want to see, like direct action.
Mm-hmm.
Those are primary ways, like engaging with the world as it is now, rather than just in the books. That's like most of it.
Yeah.
How we actually bring it about is kind of a tough question. I don't really even know if I can answer right now.
No, it is a very tough question. And I think about that a lot. I definitely think that there are people with that believe in like the anarchist view that can lose their footing, and they only talk about like the ultimate goals. But I think if you only talk about the ultimate goals, you're never going to get there.
Yeah, I agree. Have you been on Twitter to see the restaurant discourse going on?
I saw something about that, but I did not look into it. What's going on with that?
From what I can tell, some anarchists, like mostly communists, because a lot of them say stupid things, but they don't like restaurants because it implies oppression or something along those lines, because it's a relic of oppressive hierarchy right now or something. I honestly don't understand it. I think I'm happy to live in a world where people can go to restaurants, but I don't know.
Right. If I want to go to Chili's, I'd like to go to Chili's, please.
Yeah, let's just treat the workers fairly, and maybe the food will be better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you can have a change in the structure of a restaurant, and pay and wage and all that. No, pay and wage, the same thing. But yeah, it's like you can still have a restaurant. You can still provide a service. I don't see why there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ANCOMs fall down this rabbit hole of saying stupid things to be just an inch more progressive than their other comrades.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was, it might not have been Bakunin specifically, but I do find that the anarcho-communism quite fascinating, that like nobody can have power over somebody else in any context ever, that like you can't be somebody's boss, like ever. Everybody is their own boss all the time, and that's just the way it is.
I'm not even sure it's that. It's just like I don't even understand. I'll admit I haven't done too much research in ANCOM. I've read some stuff on the subject.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't understand like how things would be organized. Really, like I don't see the incentive for someone in a communist society to like do a job that's particularly difficult. Like I could say, oh, this job is really hard, so they're going to demand a higher wage, and that's fine. I think we should reward people for doing tasks no one else wants to do. Mm-hmm. And then I see some arguments. I think it's from this argument's from Anarchy Works, which is basically an ANCOM source. They say, oh, we'll reward people extra if they do hard work. And I'm just thinking, this is just reinventing the wage system or the wage labor with extra steps. Like I don't get why we should do that over just organizing with a medium of currency.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just don't get it.
Yeah, it's something else. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around it.
Yeah,
sure.
They have good critiques and stuff generally, but I think there's a lot of kind of crankery in that ideology as well.
Yeah, crankery.
Yeah.
The dangers of a concentration of all power in the general government of a confederacy so vast as ours are too obvious to be disregarded. That's Franklin Pierce, the 14th United States president. How do you feel about this quote?
That all power concentrated into a general state is too heinous to give consideration?
It's too heinous to ignore. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically anarchism. Like, power in society, not a good thing. People should have equal liberty to do as they please. I don't know how specific you want to like an answer to in that. I was reading Josiah Warren recently. A part of a big reason why states are bad is because they demand uniformity from a diverse array of citizens, which is basically impossible. under that system, like it's pretty illogical to have conformity in that aspect, especially when the state has the power to basically murder you or torture you as they please and get away with it. Like rights are essentially just they're enforced through contract or violence, as the egoist says. And in this case, when they can enforce it through violence, there's basically no checks on what they can do. And in that system, there's no security. You can blame the anarchist all you want, but in the state, there's no security for persons or property.
Yeah, it's a good quote. I like going back through American history and finding a president that I don't know, and just looking at famous quotes that they have and seeing if I agree with them or not.
Yeah,
That's how I found that Franklin Pierce quote. I don't know anything about Franklin Pierce.
Me neither.
But it's a good quote. So now I want to look more into it, you know?
Yeah, I think this is a bit tangential, but I feel like a lot of anarchists are just ideologues in general. They will close their mind just to prevent the threat of like changing.
I think pretty much everybody says the right thing sometimes.
Maybe.
Yeah. I'm sure there's at least one sentence out of context that you can find from, any like a heinous dictator throughout the decades, and it's like, oh well, that one thing you said was okay.
Yeah.
Ignoring all the the terrible things that or whatever. So that's the end of my questions. Thank you so much for being on here. Would you like to shout out any charities or organizations?
I've participated in this organization in the past, and I really like what they do. It's the Turtle Survival Alliance.
Okay.
They're really cool, and I think World Turtle Day was not too long ago. So, yeah, they're really cool. You should support them if you can.
Awesome. I'll definitely leave a link below for that. And
I can give you it after this.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great. And any other like article or book you've referenced, I'm going to try to link that as well. I like to give people the most stuff there.
Sure.
But I have links below in the description to private charities that help out your fellow human beings. Thank you all for listening.